She was the quiet one in the back row, the young soldier no one took seriously, whose voice had never once echoed through the barracks. So when someone dared her to sing as a joke, no one expected what came next. But one man did, a single dad with a gift for music and a heart that knew silence better than most. This is a story about finding your voice when the world wants you to stay silent. About how one unexpected performance didn't just stun a military unit, but healed the wounds they never dared speak of. Now, let me tell you what really happened that day. The morning sky over Stillwater, Texas, was the color of worn denim, soft, familiar, and tired. Hank Sullivan wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag and stared at the rusted upright piano pushed against the back wall of his workshop. Dust curled along its edges like forgotten lace. It hadn't been touched in 4 years, not since she died. Outside, the clang of metal on metal rang out as Emma, his 9-year-old daughter, hammered a toy wrench into an old truck rim like she was building a spaceship. Her laughter floated in clear and bright, the kind that cracked open quiet hearts. It reminded Hank of a melody he used to hum in the mornings, back when there were coffee cups for two, back when grief wasn't a houseguest in every corner of the home. He folded the rag and placed it carefully on the workbench, as if folding part of himself. "Emma," he called, "grab your coat. We've got a job today. Fort Ridge Line." She lit up. "The army place." "Yep, the same. I used to serve there, remember?" She nodded. "Will there be tanks?" "Probably." But more importantly, he added, picking up his toolbox, "they've got a few trucks with transmissions louder than your hammering." Emma giggled, grabbed her sketch pad, and followed him to the truck. As they drove down the 2-lane highway passing fields that had seen better harvests, Hank couldn't help but glance at the passenger seat, empty now. Save for a small stuffed fox, Emma refused to leave home without. There were mornings he could swear he heard his late wife humming along with the engine. Grief, he'd come to learn, didn't announce itself. It whispered. At Fort Ridge Line, the gates creaked open with a groan. Soldiers bustled about in formation or clustered in circles, sipping coffee from paper cups and laughing like war was a distant memory. But Hank saw the tightness in their shoulders, the shadows in their eyes. That tension never really left you. He parked by the motor pool. Emma darted toward the shade, flipping open her sketch pad, already scribbling the shape of a tank she saw rolling past. Hank went straight to work. That's when he heard it. A single note. Thin, wavering like a bird testing its wings after a storm. He paused, wrench still in hand, heart snagged mid-beat. It was coming from the old rec hall. The door was cracked open just enough for sunlight to spill and dust dancing in gold flecks. He pushed it open. There, sitting in front of a battered guitar with a cracked pickguard, was a young woman in uniform. Her auburn hair was tied back tightly, but a few strands fell loose around her jaw. Her boots were unlaced, her eyes downcast, and her fingers trembled slightly over the frets. The note faded. She muttered a curse under her breath and reached for the neck of the guitar again. "Not bad," Hank said gently. She jumped. "Sorry," he said, raising a hand. "Didn't mean to spook you." The woman straightened, immediately guarded. "I was just killing time, sir," he chuckled. "I haven't been a sir in a long time. Just Hank." He glanced at the guitar. "You play?" She shrugged. "Used to. Not good anymore." "Funny thing about music," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "It waits for you. Doesn't judge you when you come back." She looked at him, then really looked, and for a brief moment something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition. Respect. Or maybe just exhaustion. "Ellie," she said after a pause. "Private Ellie Monroe." "Well, Private Monroe," he replied with a small smile. "That one note you played, I heard more soul in it than in most full songs on the radio." She blinked. "They say I'm the quiet one around here. I guess that's not a compliment." Being quiet doesn't mean being empty, Hank said. Sometimes the ones who say the least have the most to sing. She didn't reply, but her fingers drifted over the strings again, soft, unsure, but no longer ashamed. Back at the truck, Emma tugged at his sleeve. Who was that? Just someone figuring out her music, Hank said. Emma tilted her head. Like you. He looked at the piano in his mind, the one gathering dust in his workshop, and exhaled. Maybe. That night after Emma went to bed, Hank sat alone in the kitchen. He pulled a yellowed sheet of music from a drawer and unfolded it. The notes stared back at him like old friends forgotten. He tapped the table in rhythm. 1, 2, 3. A silent waltz. He didn't touch the piano that night. Not yet. But he looked at it longer than he had in years. And in the distance beneath the echo of marching boots and drill calls, he could almost hear that fragile note again, hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. The next morning, the motor pool at Fort Ridgeline came alive with the sound of tools clanking against steel, and the occasional burst of laughter echoing through the open yard. Sunlight glanced off wrenches, oil pans, and fatigued faces. Most people moved with purpose. Hank moved with memory. He slid beneath an armored Humvee, his body familiar with the cramped space despite the years. The bolts were rusted stiff like old regrets. He'd just begun loosening a connector when a shadow fell across the vehicle. "You're the piano guy, right?" a voice asked. Hank rolled out, shielding his eyes from the sun. A soldier no older than 21 stood before him with a smirk. "Private Sanchez. Everyone's been talking about how you barged into Rec Hall like some kind of music whisperer." Hank chuckled, wiping his hands. "Don't believe everything you hear. I just happened to be in the right place when someone needed a little encouragement. You mean Monroe Sanchez leaned on the hood of a nearby Jeep? She's weird, man. Doesn't talk. Eats alone. Carries that busted guitar around like it's a puppy." "She got a story?" Hank asked, not confrontational, just curious. Sanchez shrugged. "I don't know. She doesn't tell. Joined up 6 months ago. Word is she tried to get into some music school before. Berkeley maybe got shut down or ran out of money. Can't say for sure." Hank nodded. That explained the way she handled the instrument like something sacred and lost. He went back to work, but his mind stayed behind in that rec hall. That girl Ellie, she didn't just carry music. She carried silence like a wound. Later that afternoon, Hank found himself back at the rec hall, not out of curiosity, but out of instinct. He didn't expect to find anyone there, let alone Ellie. But when he opened the door, she was already seated at the old upright piano. It had been wheeled out from the shadows, its legs uneven, one pedal hanging loose. Ellie sat in front of it with both hands resting gently on the keys. She wasn't playing, just sitting, listening. He didn't want to interrupt, but she spoke first. "You used to play, didn't you?" The question was quiet, almost fragile. "I did," Hank said, stepping closer. "A long time ago. What happened?" He hesitated. Most people didn't ask. Fewer wanted the real answer. "My wife," he said softly. "Cancer. It was fast. Music used to be what we did together. After she passed, the notes didn't make sense anymore." Ellie nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes she said, her voice barely audible. "I think silence is safer." He tilted his head. "You afraid of being heard?" "No," she replied. "I'm afraid of what they'll hear." There was something about the way she said it, something that landed hard in Hank's chest. Not drama, not pity, just truth. She glanced down at her hands. "My fingers used to know exactly where to go. Now it's like I'm trying to speak a language I once dreamed in." "Dreams don't die," Hank said. "They just wait." Ellie exhaled a soft laugh. "You sound like a walking Hallmark card. I'll take that as a compliment." He sat beside her on the worn bench. The piano groaned beneath their combined weight. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then, without looking at him, Ellie whispered, "Can you play something?" Hank didn't answer. He just lifted his hands. The first notes he struck were hesitant, like stepping onto ice, not sure it will hold. But soon the chords warmed. A minor. G, E minor. A simple progression, but full of breath. Ellie closed her eyes. She didn't sing, not yet, but she hummed, and the hum found the spaces between the notes, like rain in the cracks of dry earth. When the last chord faded, she said nothing, but there were tears on her cheek. "I used to sing for my mom," she said, "before she left. After that, I only sang to prove I could." "You don't have to prove anything now," Hank said. That evening, Emma asked to draw in the rec hall. She liked the light in there, she said. Hank agreed. He brought her sketch pad, and while she colored cartoon tanks in pink camouflage, Ellie practiced scales with her guitar in the corner. "You're the lady who sings?" Emma asked without lifting her eyes. Ellie paused, surprised. "I guess." "You sound like the wind in spring," Emma said matter-of-factly. Ellie smiled more than she had in days. "Thank you." Hank watched from the side, marveling at how his daughter could open doors with a single sentence that he'd never be brave enough to knock on. Emma finished her sketch and held it up. "It's you." The drawing was rough, childlike. Ellie stood on a small stage with swirls around her mouth. "That's your singing," Emma explained. "It makes the sky turn colors." Ellie bit her lip. "That's beautiful." "Daddy plays music too," Emma added, "but only when he thinks no one's listening." Ellie looked up at Hank, and their eyes met, two people caught in the act of slowly remembering who they used to be. As the day faded and the Texas sun sank behind the barracks, the rec hall emptied out. Just before they left, Ellie touched the piano. "Tomorrow night," she said. "Talent night. They'll probably ask me to sing again." As a joke. "Then sing," Hank replied gently. "Not for them. For you." Ellie nodded once, and this time when she smiled it wasn't guarded. Talent night at Fort Ridgeline wasn't meant to be profound. It was a pressure valve, an evening of skits, off-key karaoke, and questionable impressions of drill sergeants. A way to laugh, unwind, and forget for a moment that every face in uniform might someday walk into something they wouldn't walk out of. By 1900 hours, the rec hall buzzed with cheap coffee-folding chairs and the kind of nervous energy that fills the air before someone gets humiliated on stage. Ellie sat in the back, her name already scribbled on the sign-up sheet. Not by her. Of course not. Private Sanchez had taken care of that. "Monroe's gonna sing," he hollered across the room like he'd discovered a live grenade. "Y'all better stick around. Word is she trained at Berkeley or whatever." Laughter erupted. "Berkeley? You mean where the hippies go to cry?" someone called. "I thought she only knew one chord. No man, she knows. Too sad and sadder. More laughter." Ellie froze. She felt her throat tighten and her hands go cold. She hadn't signed up. She hadn't planned to sing. And now she was the punchline of the evening. She turned to slip out, but someone had already blocked the back exit. Sanchez stood there grinning. "Come on, Ellie. Let the boys hear what broken dreams sound like." Her jaw clenched. She scanned the room, searching for Hank. Not there. Her pulse pounded against her ribs, a drumline of panic. The room blurred at the edges, as if her body were trying to shut it all out. She'd seen this play out before, in middle school and high school. The stage was always theirs. She was just something to make fun of. Next up, the MC shouted from the front, another soldier with too much caffeine and not enough empathy. "Private Ellie Monroe." Let's hear it for Fort Ridgeline's very own Nightingale. Polite claps. Whistles. Laughter. She stood. Slowly. Every step toward that stage felt like betrayal. Not of others. Of herself. She reached the microphone and looked out at a sea of smirks. Her guitar was placed on a stool slightly out of tune, just as she left it in the rehearsal room. They must have brought it out just for this moment. She was a show. Her fingers touched the strings and froze. She stared at the floor, her vision starting to shimmer. The laughter quieted. The room waited. She couldn't do it. Then a sound broke through the silence. A chord. Low. Gentle. Familiar. From the side of the stage a figure emerged. Tall, quiet, steady. Hank. He walked across the room like he belonged there, pushing a worn, upright piano that clearly hadn't been played in public in years. The sound of its wooden legs scraping against the linoleum floor was almost sacramental. No one said a word. Hank adjusted the bench and looked up at Ellie. "You don't have to do this alone." She blinked. Her throat burned. Then Hank turned to the crowd, voice calm but unwavering. "You asked her to sing as a joke," he said. "But if you really want to hear something unforgettable, then shut up and listen." Gasps. Shuffling. No one laughed now. Ellie swallowed hard. Her heart thudded like thunder under her ribs. She stepped forward again. Hank struck a soft chord. A minor. Then D. Then E. Minor. The room tilted on its axis. Ellie closed her eyes. She took a breath, not shallow and fearful, but deep and slow from the diaphragm, the way her mother once taught her when she was 6 and scared of the church solo. Then she sang. At first just a whisper, a tone so thin you could barely touch it. But it grew, like sunrise over desert plains. Her voice was clear, high and haunting, weaving around Hank's chords, like smoke, finding the beams of a broken roof. Every note trembled with restraint, then resolve. It was not perfection. It was pain held in tune. She sang an old folk hymn, Wayfaring Stranger, the one she sang to herself on lonely nights when no one clapped and no one cared. I'm just a poor, wayfaring stranger traveling through this world below. By the second verse, her voice had bloomed, not loud, just true. And it shattered the room. The laughter was gone, heads bowed, shoulders slumped, and for a few long seconds even the walls seemed to breathe differently. When the final note faded, Ellie stood still. Not out of fear now, but because she had nothing to prove. She had done what they couldn't. She had told the truth. The silence was electric. Then someone stood. Walter Jenkins, the grizzled Vietnam veteran who sat alone most nights, with his hands folded like prayer. He didn't speak. He just raised his hand, palm out straight up. A military salute. Then slowly others followed. No applause, just silence. Because what they had witnessed wasn't entertainment. It was resurrection. Hank stepped down from the piano, his eyes glistening. Ellie looked at him, voice hoarse from more than just singing. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Don't thank me," he said softly. "You did the brave part." She laughed just once, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, she realized something. She was never the joke. She was the answer. The next morning, Fort Ridgeline felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Just aware. Something had shifted the night before in that dusty rec hall, and though the sun still rose over the same barbed wire fences and steel hangers, the air now carried the hum of something unspoken. Reverence. Maybe even regret. Private Ellie Monroe felt it too. She sat alone at the far end of the mess hall, untouched breakfast tray in front of her. For the first time since arriving at the base, she wasn't invisible. Heads turned when she entered. Conversations dipped as she passed. A few nodded at her quick, awkward gestures, like apologies never given words. But no one laughed. She wasn't used to this kind of silence. It wasn't the dismissive kind. This was weighty, curious, careful. "Hey," a voice said. She looked up. Private Sanchez, the same man who'd signed her up for talent night as a joke. He shifted awkwardly, holding a tray of eggs and coffee. Can I sit? Ellie blinked, then gave a slight nod. He sat across from her, cleared his throat, and looked everywhere but at her. Look, he started about last night. She said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I didn't think you'd actually get up there, he mumbled. I mean, it was just for fun. But you were good. Like real good. Ellie finally met his eyes. You thought I'd choke. He winced. I didn't mean anything by it. Yes, you did, she said softly. But it's okay. He looked down, shame washing across his face. You've got guts, he muttered. She nodded once and returned to her untouched eggs. Sanchez rose to leave but paused. I hope you keep singing. When he walked away, Ellie felt her shoulders relax, not because she forgave him, but because she knew she didn't need his forgiveness to sing again. Hank Sullivan watched the whole thing from a nearby corner. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but watching someone reclaim their voice, even in silence, was something worth witnessing. Emma sat beside him, busy sketching a cartoon version of the piano from the night before, complete with her own tiny doodle of Ellie standing triumphantly on top of it. You think she's going to sing again? Emma asked without looking up. I hope so, Hank said. She was better than Mom, huh? The words landed softly, but Hank felt them strike deep. He turned to his daughter. Your mom had her own magic. But Ellie... Yeah, there's something different there. Emma nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Later that afternoon, Ellie found herself outside the rec hall again. The doors were still open. The piano, her old adversary, and now unexpected companion, sat in the same place Hank had left it. She didn't go in. Not yet. She just stood there, staring. You know, Hank said behind her, most people would have walked away after what happened last night. Ellie didn't flinch. I almost did. But you didn't, he said. She turned to him. I sang because I had nothing left to lose. But now I'm afraid again. Afraid of what? Of them expecting it. Of letting them down. Of losing it again. Hank crossed his arms. You didn't sing for them. You sang for yourself. That's what made it matter. She was quiet for a moment. Did you ever play after your wife passed? No, he said. Until last night. Ellie looked surprised. That was your first time back. He nodded. Emma would sit at the bench sometimes and ask. But I couldn't. It felt like playing would betray the silence we'd learned to live with. Then why now? She asked. Hank smiled, faint but real. Because you looked like someone who needed someone to say, you're allowed to be heard. That evening Ellie returned to the rec hall alone. No crowd, no spotlight. Just her, the piano, and the dust beginning to settle. She didn't play. She just sat. Let her fingers rest on the worn keys. Closed her eyes. Breathed. She remembered her mother's voice, soft southern filled with warmth and song. She remembered nights in foster homes, holding her breath as doors slammed and televisions blared, clinging to a melody in her mind, like a lifeline. She remembered the silence that followed every time she tried to sing, and was told to be quiet, to be realistic, to be small. And then she remembered the look in Hank's eyes as he played beside her. Steady, patient, kind. No judgment, no agenda. Just music. Ellie placed both hands on the keys and began to play not a song she knew, but something new, forming as her fingers moved. A slow, quiet hymn with no lyrics. Just feeling. The door creaked open. Hank stood in the threshold, toolbox in hand. He smiled when he saw her. Thought I might find you here. I don't know what I'm playing, Ellie said. Doesn't matter, he replied. Sounds like the beginning of something. She didn't stop playing. He walked over, placed the toolbox down, and leaned against the wall. I've been thinking, he said, maybe we don't just leave this moment behind. She glanced up. What do you mean, I mean? What if we found a way to use it to keep it going? You mean music for people who need it? Her fingers faltered. Like performing, she asked cautiously. Like healing, Hank said. Ellie turned back to the keys. That's a nice idea. It's not just an idea, he said. There are people in this base, hell in this world, walking around with open wounds no one sees. Music doesn't fix them. But maybe it helps them remember they're still alive. She said nothing for a while. Then she played a soft B minor chord and nodded. By the end of the week, the rec hall piano was no longer just furniture. Soldiers began drifting into the room during off hours, not to play, not even to speak, just to sit. Some leaned against the walls with crossed arms and tired eyes. Others stood near the back, pretending they weren't listening. But Ellie knew better. Music had begun to unearth something here, not loud or dramatic, but steady, like a river slowly reclaiming an old bed. It started when Private Riley, a man with tattoos down both arms and a reputation for brawling in the mess hall, walked up to Ellie after PT and said, "That song reminded me of my sister. Haven't thought about her in years." Then Sergeant Dobbins asked if she could do that hymn again, the one with the walking part, wayfaring something makes me think of my dad. Even Sanchez, sheepish and tentative, lingered outside the rec hall with a takeaway coffee and nodded at her before walking on. The song hadn't just stunned the unit, it had softened it. One afternoon, Hank found himself tuning the piano without being asked. He wasn't scheduled to be at the base that day. But something about the way Ellie played, how her fingers lingered just a little longer on the high notes, as if reaching for something unfinished, kept calling him back. Emma trailed behind him, carrying a mason jar of buttons she insisted were for decoration. She'd taken it upon herself to make the rec hall feel less military and more magical. Ellie was already at the piano when they arrived. She smiled faintly. "You again." "You sound surprised," Hank said, kneeling to adjust a foot pedal. "This piano's practically adopted me. Then maybe we should name it." "Emma," said, peeking over the top. Ellie chuckled. "What do you suggest?" Emma thought for a moment. "How about Louisa? She looks like she's been through a lot, but she still sounds beautiful." Hank and Ellie exchanged a glance. "Louisa it is," Ellie said, offering her hand to the piano as if greeting an old friend. Later that evening, Ellie and Hank sat outside the barracks, sharing warm coffee from tin mugs. The autumn air had cooled, and the sky was painted in slow amber strokes. "I heard something today," Hank said. "A major's wife came up to me while I was working on a Jeep. She said she hadn't heard her husband laugh in months until the night you sang." Ellie blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't do anything special," she murmured. "You did the hardest thing," Hank replied. "You meant it." They felt quiet, comfortable. After a moment, Ellie asked, "Why are you really here, Hank?" He didn't answer right away. "Then I think I came here to fix broken engines. But now, I think I'm here to fix something in me." Ellie looked down at her hands. "Sometimes," she said softly, "I feel like I've spent my whole life being told to shut up, not just literally, but like, don't be too much. Don't take up space." Music was the only place I didn't have to apologize for existing. Hank's voice lowered. And then the world found a way to make even that feel like too much. She nodded. He looked at her. Truly. Looked like she was more than a soldier, more than a girl with a guitar and guarded eyes. Like she was someone whose silence he now understood completely. "I think," he said, "it's time we stopped treating music like a secret." The idea came later that week, in the form of a man no one expected to say much of anything. Walter Jenkins, retired Sergeant Major, Vietnam vet, and unofficial Grumpin residents of Fort Ridgeline, showed up outside the rec hall holding a clipboard. "I heard what you two did the other night," he said without preamble. "Made a few calls." Hank and Ellie exchanged glances. Walter continued. "There's a PTSD recovery unit upstate. Small, quiet, full of ghosts that don't talk. They do weekly morale sessions, but nobody shows up. I told him I've got a girl who sings like forgiveness, and a guy who plays like grief's finally learned how to breathe. Ellie's eyes widened. You want us to... What she asked. Go, Walter said. Play for them. No uniforms, no ranks. Just music. Hank leaned back, arms folded. You're serious. I've been serious since 1968, Walter said. And I know when something needs to happen. Ellie hesitated. I've never performed anywhere real, not like that. Walter looked her square in the eyes. Last week this bass stopped to listen to a girl they barely respected. That's as real as it gets. The next morning, Ellie stood in front of the mirror in her quarters guitar case beside her. She didn't wear her uniform. Instead, she wore a simple blouse and jeans, something unremarkable. But it felt like her. The version of herself she'd nearly forgotten. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like someone ready to be seen. When Hank pulled up in the truck, Emma was already buckled and sketchpad in hand. She held up a drawing. It was a picture of Ellie standing under a spotlight, surrounded by people sitting in the dark, their faces lit up in wonder. You drew that, Ellie asked. Emma nodded. That's what you do. You light people up. They drove in silence for a while, music playing low on the radio. Ellie stared out the window, one hand resting gently on her guitar case. Then she said, almost to herself, Do you really think this could help someone? Hank didn't look away from the road. I think it already has. The PTSD recovery unit outside Amarillo looked nothing like what Ellie had imagined. There were no walls lined with therapy posters or inspirational quotes. No white coats. No waiting room filled with hopeful pamphlets. Just a squat beige building that sat quietly among dry fields and stubborn weeds, as if it too had once been something bigger before the storms of life wore it down to necessity. The three of them arrived just after noon. Hank parked the truck under a patch of thin shade, while Emma, buzzing with excitement, clutched her sketchpad like it was a backstage pass. Ellie remained in the passenger seat, her hand resting on the guitar case across her lap. You okay? Hank asked. She nodded, but her grip tightened. I've played in front of soldiers. But this feels different. It is, he said gently. They're not here for a show. They're here to remember they're still human. She looked at him. What if I get it wrong? You don't have to get it right, he replied. You just have to be honest. Inside the common room was small, lit by large windows, and an overhead fan that clicked every third rotation. Folding chairs were arranged in a half circle. No stage, no mic, just space. A nurse named Carla greeted them with a polite, tired smile. She explained in hushed tones that not everyone who sat in those chairs stayed long. Sometimes they left mid-song. Sometimes they wept and left without a word. They're not rude, she assured them. They're just still figuring out how to be here. Ellie nodded, understanding more than she could say. By the time they finished setting up just the guitar, Hank's keyboard on a stand, and a small speaker they brought from the base, 7 men and 1 woman had wandered in and taken seats. No one spoke. A few avoided eye contact. One man tapped his foot constantly, like he was counting the seconds until he could leave. Walter arrived a few minutes later, dressed in a collared shirt and pressed slacks like he was about to salute someone. He didn't say much, just patted Hank's shoulder and gave Ellie a firm nod. Then, silence. Ellie cleared her throat and stepped forward. Hi, she said. Her voice felt smaller here. My name's Ellie. I'm not a therapist. I'm not famous. I used to be really good at staying quiet. And I guess now I'm trying something else. No one laughed. No one clapped. So she began to play. The song was new. Not rehearsed. Not polished. Just raw. She sang about weight, the invisible kind. About days that loop like broken records. About waking up and not knowing if you're more afraid of dying or living. Her voice never cracked, but it quivered in the way a voice does, when it's not sure it's allowed to be there. Hank's keys supported her like scaffolding, holding the melody in place, never leading, just lifting. Halfway through the song, the woman in the second chair wiped her eyes. By the final note, the man tapping his foot had stilled completely. Afterward, no one clapped. They didn't need to. One man walked forward and looked at Ellie for a long time. He didn't say anything. He just placed a worn dog tag at her feet and returned to his chair. Ellie bent down, slowly picked it up and pressed it to her chest. "Thank you." She didn't ask questions. Some burdens were gifts best carried with reverence, not curiosity. They played 2 more songs, softer ones. Hank even sang harmony on the last chorus, his voice warm and steady. Emma drew in the corner, doodling musical notes, falling from the sky onto people's open palms. When they finished, a few of the residents lingered. One man, early 60s, with a tremor in his hands, approached Hank. "You played in G major, didn't you?" Hank smiled. "Caught that, huh?" "Used to play," the man said, glancing at the keyboard, "before I stopped recognizing my own hands." Hank moved aside. "She's yours if you want." The man hesitated, then sat. His fingers hovered above the keys, unsure. Then slowly he began to play. It wasn't perfect, but it was music. And it was his. Back at the truck, Ellie sat in the open tailgate, guitar across her lap, hands still buzzing. "I thought I'd be drained after that," she said. But Hank prompted, leaning beside her. "But I feel more full than I've felt in years." He nodded. "That's how you know it's working." Emma appeared with a fresh drawing, a picture of Ellie holding a glowing lantern leading people through a dark tunnel. "It's you," she said proudly. "You're helping them find the way." Ellie smiled, blinking back tears. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're helping each other." As they drove back toward Fort Ridgeline, the sun dipped low behind them, and the field stretched out golden and vast. For the first time in a long while, Ellie didn't feel like she was driving away from something. She felt like she was heading toward something real, something that mattered. The morning after the Amarillo performance, the rec hall at Fort Ridgeline felt more alive than it had in years. Sunlight streamed in through the high windows, catching on motes of dust that danced above the worn piano like notes waiting to be written. Louisa, the name had stuck, had been tuned just the week before, and she sat center stage like a quiet sentinel waiting. Walter Jenkins stood in front of the old chalkboard near the back wall, drawing a crooked circle with the kind of determination only a man in his 70s could bring to chalk. At the top of the circle he wrote, "Healing Battalion." Ellie stared at it, one eyebrow raised. "This looks suspiciously like a plan," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Walter didn't turn. "It is. We're taking this on the road." "We," Hank echoed, entering behind her, with Emma skipping at his heels. Walter finally turned, brushing his hands together. "You, Ellie, the piano, the girl, Emma," Hank corrected with a grin. Walter nodded, unfazed. "Right. Emma, the entire unit." Ellie crossed her arms. "We played one song in a recovery center. You're talking like we're the USO. I'm talking like someone who's watched 100 soldiers come back from war without ever returning home," Walter said, voice steady. "And for the first time in years, I saw them look up because of your song." No one replied. Emma broke the silence. "I think it's a good name." Walter smiled. Hank looked at Ellie. "What do you think?" She hesitated. "I think. I'm scared. Because if we actually do this, it won't be a fluke. It'll be real. And if it's real, it can break." Walter's voice softened. "Or it can build." The next few days were a whirlwind of logistics. Walter called in favors from his old military buddies, commanders, chaplains, base directors. They arranged small healing sessions at nearby veteran clinics and underfunded rural hospitals. No fanfare, no cameras, just music chairs and people who had forgotten how to feel. Hank borrowed a trailer from a neighbor and reinforced it himself to haul Louisa safely. Emma painted its sides with bright colors and handprints from the rec hall's regulars, symbolic permission for the piano to leave home and begin its pilgrimage. Ellie spent late nights writing songs. They weren't love songs. They were life songs, about grief without glamour, loneliness without shame, and hope, raw, wobbly, uncertain, but hope nonetheless. She wrote them not to impress. She wrote them because her fingers wouldn't let her sleep until she did. Their first official Healing Battalion performance outside the military network was in a rundown church in Lubbock. The congregation had dwindled to 30 on a good Sunday, but the pews filled that night. Veterans came. So did widows, and nurses, and a man who hadn't spoken since his son died in Afghanistan, but who now sat in the back with tears silently tracking down his jaw. Hank started the evening with a solo and instrumental piano piece that echoed through the wooden rafters, like prayer. Ellie followed with a song she titled The Listening Room. She sang it with her eyes closed, letting the melody find its own way through the stillness. It told a story, not just hers, but everyone's. A story about the quietest rooms being the ones most desperate to be heard. When she finished, the audience didn't applaud. They stood, not to cheer, to honor, as if they understood that something sacred had just occurred and didn't want to bruise it with noise. Outside under the parking lot's flickering light, Ellie leaned against the trailer. Her guitar case sat at her feet. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but release. Hank approached, handing her a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. "You were incredible," he said. Ellie exhaled, almost laughed. "You keep saying that. One day I might believe you. Then I'll keep saying it until you do." She sipped, the bitterness grounding her. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that if I ever found my voice again, I'd want a stage. Big lights, a label, a name in gold." She looked up at the night sky, stars flickering faintly behind clouds. "But this," she said, "this is better." Hank leaned beside her. "Why, because they listened. Not because I was special, but because I was true." He nodded. After a moment, he said, "You know, I've been writing too." Ellie turned, surprised. "You write songs?" He smiled. "Just music. No words yet. Thought maybe you could help with that. I think we can arrange that," she said. Softly. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just enough to feel the question unspoken between them. Is this more than just music? But neither of them said it. Not yet. Instead, Ellie reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something worn and metallic, the dog tag given to her at the PTSD center. She ran her thumb across its surface. "We should build something out of these," she said. "What do you mean, a wall?" she said. "Not made of bricks, but of these. Tags. Notes. Names. Stories. Something we carry with us to every performance." Hank looked at her, and in that moment he didn't see a girl who had been mocked for singing. He saw a woman quietly rebuilding the world with every breath she dared to take. 3 days later, the wall was born. Walter called it the Wall of Echoes. Ellie called it the Notes They Never Played. Emma just called it beautiful. They hung it beside Louisa in every venue, letting people come up and pin dog tags, photos, letters, even torn napkins with song lyrics written in trembling cursive, each offering a fragment of pain. And somehow, together, creating a chorus of healing. The VA hospital in Abilene was quieter than most. It didn't echo with the clang of steel beds or buzz with overworked intercoms. It simply hummed with slow movement, wheelchairs turning corners, nurses wheeling IV poles, and time leaking out like water from an old pipe. The healing battalion arrived just before dusk. Emma was the first to step out of the truck, stretching and cracking her knuckles like a boxer before a match. She had named this stop the Big Quiet, a term she had scrawled in bold letters across the first page of her new sketchbook. "This place feels different," she whispered to Hank as he lifted Louisa carefully from the trailer. He nodded. "It's the kind of silence that isn't empty. Just waiting." Inside, Ellie scanned the long corridor leading to the community room. Her boots clicked softly against the linoleum. Her guitar felt heavier than usual today. So did her breath. Carla, the nurse from Amarillo, had made the referral. "There's one man there," she had said on the phone. "Used to sing. Church stuff. Choir boy." Then he stopped talking. Said the music betrayed him. That's the word he used. Betrayed. Now, as Ellie walked past faded posters of group therapy events and framed flags behind glass, she couldn't shake the phrase. Music had never betrayed her. But people had. They set up in a semicircle just like always. No stage, no mics. Just Louisa Hank's portable keyboard, a stool, and the wall of echoes now carefully reassembled from the tags and notes gathered in the trailer. As the room filled, Ellie felt it again, that stretch of tension in the air. Some listeners came with open faces. Others arrived like folded maps, creased, tired, unreadable. And then she saw him. Back row. Alone. A man with snow-white hair and a gaze like cracked granite. His hands trembled as he adjusted a pair of thick glasses on his nose. A nurse whispered something in his ear. He didn't nod. He didn't blink. Just stared. Ellie froze. She recognized that face. It had aged like hers, but she knew it. Pastor Miller, her foster father. The man who once sat beside her at an old upright piano and told her she had a gift from God. And later, the man who shut the lid on that piano when she begged to go to a music audition 3 towns over. Music's not a future, he had said. It's a vanity. And then when she cried, silence builds discipline. She hadn't spoken to him since she was 17. And now he sat unknowingly in the audience of the woman he once taught to hush. Hank noticed her hesitation. "You okay?" he whispered as he adjusted his bench. Ellie's voice caught. "He's here." "Who?" She nodded toward the back row. Hank followed her gaze, then looked back at her. "You want to skip this one?" Ellie stared at the old man again. Her throat tightened. The past had a way of turning you mute if you let it. She shook her head. "No. I want to sing," she began with the listening room. Halfway through, she could see it, the flicker in Miller's eyes, the micro-expression of confusion, recognition, memory. When she moved into quiet doesn't mean. Weak, her voice deepened with each verse. The lyrics told of a child who learned to whisper to keep the peace, who tucked her songs under her pillow like forbidden books, who found her voice in the quiet rebellion of surviving. By the final chorus, her gaze had settled directly on him. And for the first time in decades, he looked ashamed. After the final note hung then fell, she sat in silence, breathing hard. Her hands trembled not with nerves, but with release. The room stayed still. Then softly, slowly, the old man stood. He made his way forward inch by inch, cane clicking on the floor like a metronome. He stopped just shy of the wall of echoes. Everyone watched. He reached into the breast pocket of his faded flannel and pulled out a photo. It was creased, nearly torn, but still legible. A little girl at a piano. Ellie. He pinned it to the wall with a pushpin he had brought in his hand, then turned to face her. "I was wrong," he said. Voice rough but real. "I was so wrong." Then he returned to his chair. No grand moment, no dramatic applause, just truth. And that was enough. Later, Hank and Ellie sat outside the hospital beneath a street lamp that buzzed like an old amplifier. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and blooming sage. I didn't expect that, Hank said. Neither did I. Ellie whispered. She still held the guitar in her lap. Her fingers had gone numb. I thought if I ever saw him again, I'd feel hate, she said. But all I felt was tired. Like I've been carrying his voice in my head for years and finally set it down. Hank nodded. Sometimes healing isn't fixing what's broken. It's letting go of what kept it broken. She turned to him. His eyes were warm, steady. Always steady. Without a word, she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he let her stay there. No movement, just music. Neither of them had to play. Inside the building, the wall of echoes grew by one more voice, a photograph of a child, learning to sing again. Ellie hadn't slept much in the 2 nights since Abilene, not because of nightmares, not because of Pastor Miller's sudden appearance or even his apology. It was something else, something more restless, like an itch beneath her ribs, a pulse under her skin, a note that hadn't yet been played. She sat at the edge of the bunk in her base quarters legs tucked under her guitar in her lap, the early morning light cutting across her fingers. Her notebook lay open beside her, pages of scratched-out lyrics, false starts and half-formed chords. This time she wasn't writing from memory. She was writing from clarity. Across the base, Hank worked alone in the garage, but not in silence. Emma's old Bluetooth speaker buzzed faintly beside his toolbox, playing one of the scratch tracks Ellie had recorded on her phone. He didn't need drums, didn't need strings or background vocals, just her voice. Rough, honest trembling in places, but true. Always true. He adjusted the carburetor on an old Humvee, fingers moving instinctively. But his mind wasn't in the engine, was at the piano. With her. That evening, Ellie knocked on the trailer door behind Hank's workshop. It was where Louisa now lived between performances, gently covered keys, polished pedals newly repaired. Emma had even painted little stars on its wooden legs. Hank opened the door, wiping his hands on a rag. "You look like you haven't blinked in 12 hours, he said. "I wrote something," Ellie said, holding up the notebook. He stepped aside. "Come in." The room was warm, faintly scented with cedar and motor oil. Ellie sat on the bench, Hank beside her. No one spoke for a moment. Then she placed the notebook between them and began to play. The intro was soft, suspended, a sequence that felt like waiting at the edge of something sacred. Then her voice came in, not loud, just steady. In rooms where voices used to hide, I stitched my silence to survive. But now the quiet's learned to sing, and I no longer fear the sting. Hank froze, hands on his lap. The lyrics curled into the air like breath on cold glass. This is the room where I was found, not by applause, not by the crowd, but by a hand that didn't shove a stranger's quiet act of love. By the second chorus, Hank was playing with her. The chords rose gently beneath her words like scaffolding to a soul. If you listen close, you'll hear the broken turning into clear. In this room where healing starts, not with music, but with hearts, the final verse dropped to a whisper, then silence. Ellie sat back, tears caught in the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Hank turned toward her. "That's not a song," he said softly. "That's an anthem." She let out a breath, shaky but proud. "I don't know if anyone else will care. I do." She looked at him, really looked, and something in his gaze no longer felt like friendship, felt like home. The next morning they brought the song to Walter. He sat in his usual folding chair, arms crossed, brow furrowed as they played it once through in the rec hall. When the final note faded, he didn't speak. He stood, walked over to the wall of echoes, and pinned a piece of paper under a dog tag. It read, "Let them hear this." Then he turned and said, "Play it at Fort Ridgeline." Ellie blinked. You mean, here, next week's memorial. Base wide. Commands asking for something uplifting. What you just played is more than that. It's sacred. The announcement swept through the base like wildfire Private Monroe to perform original piece at Command Memorial. Some scoffed, others were intrigued, but most were just quiet. Ellie tried not to think too hard about it. She focused on rehearsing refining breathing. Emma drew a new cover for the Healing Battalion's set list. Ellie, standing in front of a wall of light, her guitar glowing. She looks like she's floating, Hank said, admiring the drawing. She is, Emma replied. She just doesn't know it yet. The night before the performance, Ellie stood outside the rec hall with her guitar strapped across her back. The bass was hushed. A few lights flickered across the compound. Wind rustled the flags. Hank joined her, a thermos in hand. Couldn't sleep. She shook her head. Can you believe this is happening? I always could, he said. She turned to him, voice low. I'm terrified, Hank. He stepped closer. Then let it be a song you sing scared. That's the one people remember. She laughed. Why do you always know what to say? I don't, he said, leaning slightly toward her. I just know what you need to hear. They stood like that for a while. Two people quietly tethered by music and meaning. Ellie looked at the stage from a distance, just a flat platform in front of the flagpole. But it wasn't the wood, the lights, or the audience she thought about. It was the message behind the melody, the people she'd carry with every verse, the girl she used to be, the ones still listening in silence, and the man beside her who had shown her that sometimes the most profound love isn't loud. It's steady. At Fort Ridgeline Memorial Day wasn't about speeches, it was about names. The names read aloud one by one from a stone podium, the names etched into plaques that caught the morning sun, the names murmured in silence, carried in lockets, folded into pockets, pressed to lips before sleep. And now, for the first time in its history, the bass was adding something new to its tradition. A song. The bleachers were full by 0900, uniforms, stiff flags at half-mast, and a stillness in the air that made the birds seem to sing quieter than usual. Rows of boots shuffled against gravel as families, soldiers, and veterans took their places. Hank stood near the back, fingers in his pockets, watching the stage being prepped. Louisa sat on a small riser, newly polished, the piano's dark wood gleaming like a heartbeat in the sunlight. Ellie was behind the curtain of the makeshift stage, tuning her guitar for the third time, even though it was already perfect. Her hands were cold, her heart loud. You ready? Walter asked, adjusting the brim of his hat. She exhaled. No, but I'm going anyway. That's how you know it matters. Emma appeared beside her, holding a folded piece of paper. I made this, she whispered. Ellie unfolded it. A simple sketch of her on stage with the words, You're singing for all of us. Ellie smiled, blinking back tears. Thank you. Then the base commander stepped up to the mic. Today we honor the voices we lost, and with humility, we introduce a new voice, one that reminds us why we remember. He stepped back, and the silence stretched. Ellie walked out slowly, the guitar slung over her shoulder. No uniform, no medals, just a simple blue blouse and jeans. She looked like herself, and somehow that was more powerful than 1,000 dress blues. She sat at the piano. A soft breeze moved through the crowd, lifting a few pages from a program in someone's lap. Ellie's fingers hovered above the keys. Then she played the first note. It was quiet, deliberate, like knocking gently on a door that had been closed for too long. Her voice followed. In rooms where voices used to hide, I stitched my silence to survive. People turned toward one another. Some leaned in. Others lowered their heads. But now the quiets learned to sing, and I no longer fear the sting. The wall of echoes stood just behind her, flanked by flags. On it were dozens of dog tags, handwritten letters, crayon drawings, a wedding band. She didn't look at the wall as she sang, but she felt it. And they did too. From the back row, Hank couldn't take his eyes off her. It wasn't just the melody, it was the way she held the silence between verses. Like those quiet moments were just as important as the notes. She had learned not to fill space, but to honor it. Next to him, Walter stood straight, arms behind his back, his jaw clenched tight. But his eyes shimmered. "That's not a song," he whispered. "That's a prayer." As Ellie reached the bridge, her voice wavered, not with nerves, but with emotion so raw it cracked clean through the air. If you listen close, you'll hear the broken turning into clear. A woman in the front row placed her hand on her chest. A young Marine wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. An elderly man confined to a wheelchair bowed his head and mouthed something, perhaps a name, perhaps a goodbye. The final chord rang out, suspended just a moment longer than it should have. Then, silence. Not the kind Ellie used to fear. This silence was sacred, holy. And then, without a word, they stood. One by one, the entire crowd rose to their feet. No applause, no cheers, just presence, respect, reverence. Ellie stood, her eyes glassy. She stepped back from the piano, nodded once, and whispered into the mic, "Thank you for letting me be heard." After the ceremony, people came not with praise, but with stories, one by one. A mother showed Ellie a photograph of her son who never made it back from deployment. She pressed it into Ellie's hand. A nurse from the base clinic said, "I've worked here 10 years and never cried at a memorial until now." A teenager handed her a letter that simply read, "Your song gave my dad a reason to talk today. That's the first time in 4 months." By midday, the wall of echoes had doubled in size. That night, Ellie sat on the steps outside the rec hall, guitar beside her, hair pulled back. The sunset painted everything in peach and gold. Hank approached, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. No sugar, just how she liked it now. "Big day," he said, handing her a mug. She smiled. "Big doesn't even begin to cover it." He sat beside her. They didn't speak for a while, the kind of silence that was earned. Then she said quietly, "When I was a kid, I thought I'd only matter if I was the best, if I got the part, the solo, the scholarship." Hank looked at her, and now he asked. She glanced at him, voice soft. "Now I just want to matter to someone." Hank placed his hand over hers. "You already do." And for the first time in her life, Ellie didn't flinch from being seen. Inside, Louisa sat still in the dim rec hall, keys dusted with sunlight, wall of echoes gently swaying with the breeze from the cracked window. And in the quiet, it was as if the piano exhaled. Because sometimes silence sings the loudest. 3 months later, the Healing Battalion played to a full house in Boise, Idaho. The venue wasn't fancy, a converted old train depot turned veterans center, but the folding chairs were all taken, and there were people standing in the back, some with arms crossed, some with tissues already in hand. Ellie sang "The Listening Room" last. By now her hands moved with practiced ease, her voice sure and warm. She no longer trembled at the keys or second-guessed the silences between the verses. She had grown into her song, and the song had grown into something larger than her. When it ended, a young man in uniform stood up and whispered, "Thank you for giving me back my voice." After the show, as people added their dog tags and notes to the wall of echoes, Ellie sat beside Louisa, running a gentle hand along the polished edge. She felt Hank approach before she saw him. "You were brilliant tonight," he said. She smiled, tired but peaceful. "I didn't even realize we were in Idaho until someone handed me a potato-shaped pin backstage." He chuckled. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" She looked up at him, really seeing him, Not just the man who saved her on stage that first night, but the man who stayed, who kept showing up. Not just miles, she said. Lifetimes. They stood quietly as Emma skipped over holding a new sketch. This one showed all three of them, Ellie with her guitar, Hank at the piano, Emma painting stars onto Louisa's legs. In the sky above them were notes shaped like wings. Ellie bent down to eye level. "What do you call this one?" Emma shrugged. "Our family." Neither Ellie nor Hank responded at first, but the truth of that word family sank deep into the space between them, not because it was sudden, but because it had always been there, forming note by note. Back at Fort Ridgeline, the rec hall had transformed. What used to be a quiet, forgotten room was now called the listening room, officially renamed and recognized by command. The piano Louisa remained in the center, adorned with strings of warm white lights. Along the back wall, the wall of echoes stretched even farther, now expanding past its original frame. People continued to send in tags, photos, letters, even pieces of uniforms and programs from memorial services. A museum in Austin asked if they could replicate it for a national exhibition. Ellie declined. "It doesn't belong in a museum," she said. "It belongs where people can touch it, add to it, heal by it." So Walter, with Emma's help, built 2 more walls, one for travel, one to stay. In late fall, Ellie received a letter postmarked from her old foster home. Inside was a photo she hadn't seen in 20 years, her at age 10, playing a battered upright piano with both hands, while another girl stood behind her clapping along. The letter was unsigned, but the final line read, "You weren't the only one who learned to be quiet. Thank you for helping the rest of us make noise again." She folded it carefully, tucked it into the wall of echoes between 2 dog tags. Then she sat as Louisa closed her eyes and began to play something new. One evening after a performance in Nashville, Hank stood beside Ellie outside a diner that had once hosted Johnny Cash. The sky was bruised purple with stars. "You ever think about recording it?" he asked. "The album?" She nodded. "With stories, real ones, from the people who added to the wall." Hank grinned. "We could call it Songs from the Listening Room." She smiled. "That's perfect." He hesitated. "Maybe we could find somewhere to settle down between performances. Something with a porch. You, me, Emma. A real home." Ellie turned to him slowly. "You mean it." He didn't speak. He kissed her. Softly, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence that finally made sense. The last scene was simple. No stage, no fanfare. Just Ellie sitting at the piano with Emma asleep on the floor beside her, curled up with a blanket embroidered with the words, "Hope sings quietly." Hank brewed tea in the corner, humming along to her melody. And as she played, she glanced down at a small stack of letters, piled beside the bench notes, from soldiers, widows, children, medics. She opened the top one and read the first line. "I didn't know I was allowed to feel this, until I heard her voice." Ellie touched the keys again, the music rising. Because even though the tour would one day end, and the stages would empty, and the chairs would be folded, the voice would remain. Not just hers, but all of theirs. And it would keep singing, in the silence, in the echoes, in the rooms that used to hide. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It always amazes us how music, kindness, and second chances can connect people across the world. And if you haven't yet, we gently invite you to subscribe. Here we share stories that celebrate healing, quiet strength, and the unexpected power of doing good, even when no one's watching. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending time with us today. We hope this story brought you peace, reflection, and maybe a little hope. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and never stop listening for the quiet voices that matter most.